Okay, so let's discuss quickly the version 1, the first version that we took in the previous session. What is the good and what is the bad about it? So, okay, so essentially, you can see from here, right? So this app.by is linked to everything. So if this is gone, we have no system. We discussed this before, right? And the other thing, this is discussing the control flow. And I told you it's a good thing in your report to mention everything, every good and bad thing about every certain file. Here, I'm not starting with the file. I'm just starting with the control flow, how things are communicated. And then I'm going into the first file, which is the logic.by. I'm saying that logic start to maintain a state. It's trying to maintain a state, right? Meaning that it is taking, if you take a look at the code from here, I actually close everything from this one. Okay, so this is logic.by. It's trying to maintain a state. This state is the temporary user's copy that you get from the database, right? Once you read it using this upload or this initializer function, you're going, by the end of the day, if you did a registration, to call the right function, right? And this right function essentially is going to update this temporary users here. Okay, so this is the state that the logic is trying to maintain, but this is maintained via a global, as we have seen, this global here. Okay, and I'm going to tell you exactly why globals are bad in just a second. Tamam? So global has something called side effects. Okay, so globals have something called side effects, right? So I'm just going to give you a hint about what are these side effects, right? Let's go to the application, and hopefully this should work. So let's take a look at this app.by. Right. Let's try to, these are a couple of comments that I just can delete here. This is the first version, yes, this is the first version. I'm just going to run this just to make sure that everything is working. I will tell you now. أنا المفروض إنه lab 2 and lab 3 covers the version 1 and 2 and 3. Essentially, if you finished or tried to code at least version 3, then we're good to go. If you didn't, وأنا عارف إن معظم الأدم maybe they didn't attempt version 3, I'm just going to show you what version 3 looks like. After you finish what is the code is talking about, هنبتدي بقى, we're going to start to refactor into AutoCAD. تمام? And there's going to be a small activity where I'm going to see everyone's way of refactoring things in AutoCAD. Okay, so let's try to enter something. So this is essentially the created user. If I go to this file, you can see that this is the last username that we have created, or user that we have created, right? So the problem is the following, is that, remember that inside logic.by, if I go here, actually, you can split this up. Okay, so inside logic.by there is a global variable. This is a temporary copy of the users, where we start off by initializing it from the real copy from the database, right? So we take the real copy from the database, the actual users, and we pass this list to this function, and this function just handles the initializing of this temporary copy. Okay, so this is the layer in between, the middle tier layer, which is the logic.by. It's trying to grab the values from the database and just keep a certain copy there, right? In case the user interface needs something from it to register, to log into, whatever. Okay, so the problem is as follows. Let's say that we have updated everything from the database, right? So I'm just going to say that I'm going to print the users that are currently in the database. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Okay, you should see this at the beginning before we even start to take inputs from this function. So these are the current users. Okay, now let's just break out of this loop, and I'm going to do something slightly fishy here. I'm going to say, grab this temporary user, okay, from logic.by. I know that from logic we have certain functions, but what if a naive developer or a beginner developer or someone who's trying forcibly to mess up the code, right? Maybe he just wants to do something or inspect something in this array, right? So I can do something like this. I can just import logic, right? And if anyone is using Python, keep in mind, Python is not like other languages. It is runtime based language, meaning that whenever you import a file, see, I'm importing this file, this direct import here, this executes the entire file immediately, right? So if there's any code that needs to be executed here, right? Luckily, we have only function definitions. But if there is any code that is going to be executed, once you import this file, this code is going to execute it in this line. See, this is an example. Let's say running from logic.py, right? So if I try to run this app.py, the first thing that you see is running from logic.py. So the import actually executes the file. So keep this in mind. In any other language, in statically or strongly typed languages like C++ and Dart, this is not the case. Okay, so let's just remove this from here. Now I'm going to go back to the logic, and I'm going to say after I print the current list of the users that I've just synchronized from the database, I'm just going to do the following. I'm just going to say logic dot grab the actual list, the actual global list, right, which is called timber users, right? And now you know that the list contains these. Currently, inside logic, after we initialize using this function, you know that the current timber users are this list that I've received from the database. Okay, so if I went and said something like, just like this, contains nothing now, right? And try to run this. Let's try to see what is the error that we are going to see. Okay, actually we can print the current list of users after changing or modifying this global variable, right? So let's run this one more time. So this is the first print statement. This is the first print statement, which gets you the current synchronized list of users from the database, right? This is essentially at this point in time, right? At this breakpoint here, this is what the timber user contain, right? I can actually copy this just for simplicity's sake. I can put this here. Okay, so these are the current list inside timber users. Whenever you get to this point, right, you change the global variable, which is essentially the timber users, right? So now whenever you try to print it, this is the new reassigned value, this one. So all of this is gone. So this is the current new value, right? So let me try and continue my work and try to register. I'm going to give the input any name and any value, and it's going to tell you there is a problem in essentially find. I think this is find by, right? In find by, it's using keys and values, and essentially we have no more keys and values, right? These keys and values are gone from me. I don't have these. I just have a string. Okay, so this is the side effect that we have talked about global, right? The main side effects of globals are essentially because they are module level variables, right? Fahmin, do you understand what is module level variables? This means that a module can immediately, if this is defined as a global elsewhere, I can immediately, right, call or import this variable and change its value. And if this is depending on something, everything is going to break later on. Right? Notice that in Python, even if I just commented all of this in Python, any variable by default that is defined anywhere in the script, this is considered to be a global, right? Inside functions, we just say that we need to tell Python that I'm going to need this guy, right? And I'm going to access it from the global scope. So even if you didn't write global here, even if you don't have any function definitions, as long as you have a variable just defined anywhere in the script, this means that this is a global variable. Okay, so this is the problem with globals, and this is the side effects. I included a link for you, and I think it's really worth watching. I think this is the one. Okay, so actually I have it over here. Okay, so these are some stuff that are essentially the problem with globals. You cannot test them, right? First of all, it does this kind of namespace pollution. If you don't understand what is namespace is essentially if I want to see what is the namespace of the current file. Namespace here means all of the imported or defined functions or variables in this file. So the namespace for this file, for app.py, is all of these imported functions and any variable within the files that we are importing. So this is our namespace. This is the pool of variables and functions. Okay, so essentially globals does this namespace pollution, right? And the most important thing, as we've seen, that there is no access, there is no control. Anyone can access the globals, anyone can change them, right? And the minute that you see so many globals in your code, you should know that you're doing something wrong. All of these are code smells, right? And all of these can easily be solved via object-oriented or classes, right? So let's just go back here to the list. Okay. So continuing, register, if you remember our discussion, what if registration now takes an email? What if it takes a second password? What if it takes a different address book, right? So it's not only a username and a password. So it takes multiple arguments. In this case, registration is going to break what we call the open and close principle. And these principles, I'm going to give you exact examples, yani, inshallah, but even if I didn't, I suggest if you want a higher mark to just, yani, we covered the O, we covered the S, we covered the D, and I'm going to recap on the D, dependency injection. Take a look at these and try to adopt them in your code. تمام? To re-emphasize on the point of this module, it is fine to open up a video, a playlist that does the implementation of a couple of features in your system. That's fine. But what you need to keep in mind is that while you are following the video, while you are writing the code behind this developer or whatever, whoever posted this video, you need to make sure that do not follow this strictly. He writes the code in a certain way just to give you the idea. This is how things are usually or naively implemented. You should see the implementation, implement it initially the first way as in the video, and try to refactor it, right? Keep these mindsets inside your mind whenever you are reading or trying to write this code, right? So this guy is writing redundant code. This guy is using globals, right? And we know how to solve these things. So let's try to write our own version. You're following the same code, but you're writing your own version as well. Okay, so um, yeah, so this is the bad. The good thing is essentially what we call loose coupling, and loose coupling is facilitated via something called the law of Demeter. And I really suggest that you include something like this in your codes. Law of Demeter, in a nutshell, I'm going to recap or revisit law of Demeter in just a second whenever we get to object oriented. But this essentially means that whenever we are using an object, right, or a function, right, you should not be accessing too many layers, too many domains, right? And I don't. Let's say that we have a class A, right? So this is class A, regardless of the language A, right? And this A contains a variable, and this variable, let's just say that contains a function, and this function is called, say now that class B, okay? Class B now contains the object that this class B inside the constructor, right? Contains an object of A. So I'm going to create an object, a small object of A. Last name is object of A. Small variable, this is so let's say that you want access to what you're going to do in driver code. That's the definition for it. And driver code or the client code. So starting with something like this, the object of B. And store it inside of B. Now I want to access this, right? So you want to from B, from the object B, I want to access service. But you don't access those calling as well. We discussed that calling before that there is an output. Another way to what is essentially it's not going to throw errors here. This is okay. So this is and essentially it violates all of the meter. Right? Our total review is something called the functions. What are the relation functions? Right? Functions in code. So like this. A function have a primary which is itself, but all that it does is that delegates Okay, so this is the good thing. We did the same thing slightly. We followed the law of Demeter. It's not the same way here, but we did this in the previous refactoring. So if you see handle inputs was directly called, this is coupled, right? So it was handle inputs was coupled to handle register. We refactored this to the following version. See, we don't really have handle inputs anymore in this handle register function, but we call these two separately in the driver code, which is the app.by. Okay, تمام. طيب, let's continue. So we had also a high coupling in the read function, right? And we solved this via globals, right? When we said that we have prepare connection placed in read, and also essentially prepare connection was placed inside write. So we said that we can just call it once inside read, right? And we can use globals to facilitate this. I want to ask you a question. If we don't want to use globals, what is the other alternative without object-oriented? Now I want to call to prepare the connection inside read and inside write. Okay? But I don't want to use global. Can anyone come with a solution؟ أي حد ممكن يفكر في أي حاجة؟ What do you think؟ ومن غير without object oriented, without using globals. What if you want to make sure that prepare connection is called before read, before write, before any CRUD operation؟ حطها في function تانية. مين ماجد؟ او ممكن تقول ان انا I'm going to call prepare connection in the driver code in app.py يعني. You can say that I'm going to call prepare connection first. صح؟ بعد كده I'm going to call read. Right? But this read. But this is going to be essentially repeated every time you do a CRUD operation. يعني if we have a write, it's going to be the same thing. Prepare connection, then write. If you have to update or delete, so prepare connection and update. There is something called dependency injection. This is the D from the solid, right? So it's the D from the solid principles. Dependency injection here is essentially, actually you have seen dependency injection in the first year, maybe actually كمان في in foundation. The second that you've taken functions, you actually were working on dependency injection. Dependency injection is just about sending arguments, putting arguments into the function signature. This is it. This is dependency injection. Whenever we say that we are injecting this dependency into read, right, or passing this argument into read, this is dependency injection. Okay. There's something called dependency inversion, but we're not going to talk about this now. So the simplest version of dependency injection is essentially this. Whenever we say that read or write takes two arguments, we are essentially saying that we are injecting two dependencies, this function. Right? It is the same mantra of saying you have a delivery guy coming to your doorstep and leaving the delivery at the front of the door. It's totally up to the function inside. It's totally up to you whether you want to take these the arguments and use them inside the function definition or not. Okay? So another implementation would be as follows, right? We can say that read is going to take a version of the stored file path, right? And every time that we want to prepare or read something, we're just going to use it. Same thing for write, right? I'm going to send a version of the connection, right, to the database and just going to perform our write operation, right? So this way we didn't use globals. بس دي المشكلة. This is the problem that Magid was mentioning, is that in order to do this, I should be able to prepare the connection every time before I perform a CRUD operation. تمام؟ I need to be able to perform prepare before read, before write, before any of these. And once we have a return value, I'm just going to pass this return value, right, as a dependency, as an argument to the function. تمام؟ And do you understand what is dependency injection? It is just passed arguments to the function. That's it. تمام؟ And let me tell you something. Okay. Testing this one, how testing this one.
problem here means that the outer function, inside the outer function itself, there is a code for a different function. Okay? So this is the problem. Whenever we test this, we are going to do something called connection equal. Yes. Right? So in order to decouple this dependency, this function call inside that function, we are going to use something called patching. And patching is not a very friendly. It's one of the annoying functions to use whenever you are this operating this. Right? But on the other hand, if we are not entirely the same. Patching here means an enter, if it's called a function, you enter the function itself and try to see what are the what are the dependencies that we have, what are the function calls that we have. Let's say that this is, for example, what? If you want to test right, what do you want to test exactly in right or insert or insert entry? So like, what is the main test case if I want to test right? A right function. What does right to mean? What does insert into mean? What does it do? What does it do? Insert data in the database. So the main test case is what? If I inserted a certain user, a certain data or row to the database, I just want to make sure that this record in the database, this row exists. Right? So this is the main test case, right? Yes, exactly. Exactly. We need to open the connection to the database and make sure that do you have this record that we have just created in this test method. Okay. So let me just use the read function. Why don't we just open another read function? So I'm opening the connection again. Just use the read function. That's another code.
So our suggested solution was essentially this, Abdullah. Okay, perform the prepare connection before the read and before the write. Perform it anywhere in the code. And once you have the connection, send it as an argument to the function.
Okay, so again to the same problem. This is the problem. You will find yourself in a very bad situation where you need to. And if we are using dependency injection, the D from solid. Dependency injection just means that anywhere in the driver code, let's say that this is our driver code. If I follow the second case here, this is the driver code. Prepare the connection once, anywhere, connection, right? Right? Once you have the connection, call whatever CRUD that you want to call, right? But the point here now is that you can send this as an argument or inject it to this function as an argument. Right? So this is going to be sent like this. For right, it's going to be the same thing. This is the dependency injection. So the dependency injection means here that reduce the coupling, do not call anything within the function as much as possible, but instead let the driver code, let the file that is going to be using the read, the prepare connection outside of the driver connection. So it prepares the connection on its own, and then it passes the connection to read, and then it passes to write, and so on. This is why I was saying that knowing exactly where the code is defined is important, and knowing where the code should be called from is also important. Okay?
So let's continue. And obviously, how is this better? We don't have any globals anymore, so this is how it's better, right? But the question here, who should be responsible for injecting? Who should be responsible for calling the prepare connection? And in our case, this is the client. Client means anyone who's going to use this function. Any file that is going to be using this function. Client will also be end user. We mean here the file. What is the file that's going to be using prepare connection, prepare or read or write? تمام؟ طيب. Okay, so this is the new driver code. This is the applet py. In our case, the driver is the applet py. Okay, so instead the problem, this is one problem here, is that applet py is going to be the client code using the prepared function. But now the applet py is not only responsible for reading. عشان الapplet py, for the applet py to perform the read, it needs to prepare the connection, as we've just discussed, and send this connection object to this read function or to the write function. as a dependency that is injected, right? Maybe this is a good thing for testing wise, for testing purposes, but the problem is that we violate a principle, a very important principle. حد عارف what is the problem with this code? Prepare connection. So we calling prepare connection inside. So we're done with that. Prepare connection is prepared once. But in this, we said that there's a problem you read. Read is essentially you are calling a different function. For testing purposes, this is going to be really hard to test. So, just once more, right? Take the added by the client is using the write and the read and stuff of that access is going to be responsible for creating the prepare connection once in this line and sending the connection as a dependency, as an argument, to read, to write, to update. Now this is really, of course, in testing, it's not going to be, and you're going to test literally this function in a matter of 5 minutes. Okay? But what is the problem with this code? What do you think? This is the new definition of read. Do you see any call for prepare connection here? No, we just open the file and we load the content and that's it. But we take the connection as an argument. This is the new implementation. This is the dependency injection implementation. The previous implementation كان كده يا ماجد. This was the previous implementation. That read ده كان اللي انت بتقوله بقى. ان read needs to call prepare connection هنا تمام and then open the file and read. But this case we just added an argument هنا. We said that we are going to send the connection via the argument, the header of the function, right? And someone else, some other script is going to be responsible for calling prepare connection. Read is not going to be responsible for calling prepare connection. فين؟ Yes, here in this solution we are not using globals anymore. معناها انه it's fine but يعني once you have more than 3 globals per script, this is a code smell. This is where you have spaghetti code and you don't have essential control flow. مفيش control معين. يعني الكنترول ماشي ازاي؟ ان الفانكشن دي if this function is using this global variable, then the control is here. Once you use the global variable and reassign it, the control is back to this global variable, and then the control is back to the line after the assign of the global, and so on. So we have a spaghetti control flow, right? So this was essentially the problem with your globals. But this solution doesn't use any globals and doesn't use overconnected. My question was, why is this bad? This looks really simplified, and here you can tell that each function is doing one thing, right? It's doing only a single responsibility. So this is good, right? And we are delegating the call for prepare connection to a different responsibility, to a different script, which is the average by here. So let me tell you the problem with this code. The problem with this code is something called abstraction or information hiding. It is the same principle. Let me show you this example. See, you have this code that essentially does sending the mail by the end of the day. But in order to send the email, right? And note that you are writing a file, you are writing a library for an end user to use. Okay? So in order to send an email, you need to have all of these steps. So you need to connect to the internet, connect to the mail server, and validate the subject and the body fields in the email. So you wouldn't have any fields empty. Okay, so one would say if this is how I define my class or library or file or whatever, the client code that is going to be using it is going to be using it like this. First of all, the client, meaning that the main by or the file that is going to be calling the functions, first of all is going to be responsible for connecting to the internet, the mail server, validating the fields, and sending an email, right? This is one version. The other case scenario is the following. What if we have these definitions, the same definitions, but we delegate the call for this definition inside the email, the send email function, and the client is responsible for only calling one function. Which approach do you think is better? Which one is slightly hiding our information, hiding our implementation? The second one, this one, right? The main.py, the client by, right? The client file or the driver file. it doesn't know anything about the implementation, and this is good. This is information hiding. This is information hiding or abstraction. Did you take abstract classes in the previous semester? I'm not talking about abstract classes here. Abstract classes is an implementation detail in programming. I'm talking about the concept of abstraction, right? So we want to have our code as abstract as possible to any layer, to any script that is going to be calling our functions. Meaning that if I know that this file, this client file is going to be using my function, let it just use one function, and inside this function, we have all of the other dependencies called. تمام? Here we are enforcing the abstraction. We are making everything so abstract for the user or the client. يعني ايه abstract for the user برضو? Whenever we say abstract here, we say that the client doesn't know anything about what is inside the send email. All that the client knows is that send email is responsible for doing anything internally, and it's just going to send the email. So this is better, the second one. تمام? So you always should think about that. تمام? And the client here is going to be the layers. So I can have a client, شباب, I can have a client that like logic.py. This is a client. And this client is the client for whom? This example. We have logic. User that access here. Right? Okay. So logic here is going to be the client for that access. That logic is going to be calling write, read, update from the access. Client logic is going to be the client for that access. If we talk about user interface, you will see that user interface is going to be the client for logic. So it's going to be calling this traditional from here. The point, Tani, and we want to make the client, the one who's calling our function, to know as little as possible about the implementation in the code that he's calling. That's it. So if you have logic calling so many things, prepare, read, write, you can just have it call one function. For example, just write. Here, we need to call only register. I don't care about uploading or synchronizing the from values or anything. Just register, like this. Yeah? Right. We can slightly fast forward this. So keep in mind that you should read these يعني, in these notes in the slides, right? One last thing that we want to emphasize is that we have find by this function that searches. This is the search functionality, right? And it takes a list. And this is slightly a problem here because every time you need to search, you're passing the list, right? Every time you need to even write something, right? Yes, we are sending the entire records, the entire table of the users. تمام? So this is going to be, there is no other solution for this part otherwise than objects, right? We need to have some kind of a shared state. And a shared state or a shared variable means that I need to have this list accessible by any function, by the find by user exists, by any function, right? And Shabab, the point of object-oriented أصلا, this was implemented to facilitate sharing. Before object-oriented, we cannot share. In order to share variables between functions, before object-oriented procedurally, you only had a globals. If you want to say that this function read is going to be sharing this variable, which is outside, then you should tell read or make read tell Python that I'm using this as a global. So before object-oriented, we share variables using globals. Object-oriented removed globals and told you that we have a different way to share variables within طبعا containers or objects and so on. تمام؟ Okay, so the second version, really quickly, looked like this. تمام؟ We said that in the previous version, we didn't have any communication between logic and data access. In the second version, we tried to modify this slightly. We said that if we placed user exist, which actually relies on find by, if we place this in the logic.by, right? We can say that we have a connection here. Why? Because user exist uses or calls find by. So we can import find by from data access. This import is going to facilitate the communication. تمام؟ واضحة الفكرة يا جماعة؟ So this is how we created a connection. تمام؟ The final version, the final procedural version, and this is slightly the cleanish approach, was essentially to be having this kind of dependencies. Remember these circles that I've told you about? The point of this course is to follow this circle. This is what we call the clean architecture.
but this is the stop. The minute how modules will access each other. So if I'm at the amplifier, which is essentially I need to be able to access one in one, right? So from amplifier, I should be able to use just user interface. User interface has the inputs and calling one the register function. Only if you access one and if you user interface then access all these or maybe pass one, this is a code smith. So this is essentially a code smith. Okay. So the amplify access this, access that access. So this was facilitated in the third version, right? We said the following. We are going to do these, it's the same three modules, but essentially we placed user exists in logic by, and that was the previous version. This was the second version modification, right? And we said that anyone who's going to use read and write is not going to be this guy. Previously, applet py was responsible for calling read, for calling write, for calling everything, right? So we said that who wants to write the register? Whenever you perform registration, you write into the database, صح? So if the logic is going to register, then obviously I should place the write inside the register function. So this means that logic is going to access all of the CRUD operations, and then user interface just takes the inputs and call register, right, from the logic.py, and the app is responsible for just calling the user interface. In this case, this version of the applet.py is just going to be calling the user interface and say register, and that's it. So we minimized the responsibilities for the applet.py as much as possible. تمام? Let me show you the implementation. Okay, so see this one. This is the final version, right? Now applet.py is importing from only one file, يا جماعة, which is the user interface. The client is just it needs just just the user interface, and it needs the inputs, it needs the hand register, and that's it. So if you take a look at the first one, you take the inputs, and then you handle the registration. All right. So after you handle registration, what happens behind the scenes? This is the responsibility for user interface, right? So if we take a look at how registration or how handle registration is implemented in user interface, you can see that it looks like this. So hand registration is going to call register. Note, user شباب بص شايفين معايا user interface is just accessing logic. User interface is not accessing anything else, just logic, and it stops at logic. تمام? Now take a look at logic. Take a look at the register at logic. Now logic only accesses what? The data access by. Okay? So you see there is only a single import in every module. That's it. This is how a clean architecture should look like. تمام? Finally, logic.py just accessing the data, and the registration uses the CRUD operation from the data access, which is essentially write and find by and so on. تمام? So this is the final implementation. I wrote a couple of notes here because we needed to perform an if and else statement in the applet.py, right? And I've told you that conditionals essentially are the reason for any spaghetti code that you're going to find, right? Especially if, elif, or if, else, if, else, if, else, if. If and else on its own, it's fine. If and else, it's not going to be harmful. The problem with if, else, if, and else, if, and the endless chaining of if and else, ifs, right? So this is one version, right? And I've told you a couple of notes, okay, to make this slightly faster. Now, from my experience, you have just five solutions to reduce if statements, or if and else, if and else, if. The first one is essentially containing things or containing any conditional block. Don't leave. This is a bad thing. شباب, do not place any conditional in the script like this. ما ينفعش. You should not be able to place an if and else if in the script. You should be able to place it in a function. تمام? If you have an if, look,
a loop, a for loop block. Place this inside the function. Don't leave it scattered like this. This was acceptable in the first year. That's fine. تمام. So the first solution is place any conditional, any logic control structure block, if or for loop inside a black box, a function or a method inside a class, right? The other solution is use a dictionary, تمام. And I would. Hmm. Can you give me soft any examples, huh? Right. You can use a dictionary. You can use something called inheritance, abstract classes, and interfaces. This is we are going to focus on this heavily in the next week, inshallah. تمام. Finally, we are going to take, I think, by what, week 9 or week 10, week 9, supposedly, we're gonna take something called design patterns. I think Dr. Ahmed mentioned design patterns in the previous year really briefly, but you have a certain design pattern that you can use for if statement for exactly your situation. You can use the factory method design pattern. Then there is also another, the fifth solution with use if statements is the open closed principle from Solid. And also a sixth solution, which is something called a strategy pattern. Dr. Mohammed can a strategy pattern, and this is slightly advanced. I don't even want to cover this. It's different. Right? So I'm going to stick with the first solution, and I'm going to place this if statement. Basically, this if statement does the following. If we have an input, make sure that this user, right, does not exist. If he does not exist, if he exists, we're going to exit this. This cable is just horrible. Unfortunately no. انتوا ايه متأخرين اصلا على 10 يعني تعالوا على واحدة وهديكوا بريك. مش هدي بريك. I'm really sorry معلش. طيب. I'm going to file a complaint أنا يعني على موضوع الكيبل ده because this is just dumb يعني. طيب. So we take the inputs, we check if the user exists. If he exists, we cannot perform registration. If he does not exist, then we can register. Now the refactoring that we did is that we pick the first solution and we put this if statement or if block inside the register function, and it makes sense, right? Makes sense. بس نشوف بس بتاع. Oh my god. تمام. So it makes sense to put this if condition inside the register. تمام. But there's slightly يعني a couple of code smells in this register function. تمام. حد عارف ايه problems? What are the problems with this register function? Can you tell like one or two problems? This register function. Let's take the single responsibility principle. How many responsibilities does this register function do? اللي هم validates صح, validates the inputs and then appends the current user to the user's list, right? Okay. And there's something else برضو. We can actually say that validation is part of the function. It's fine. يعني this we said that this is a helper function by the end of the day. So it is fine to have it inside register to validate the inputs. But I'm going to say that this is appending users plus that it is telling you this print statement. It is printing to the screen, right? It is saying something called account exists. We cannot register you. تمام? Why is this a bad thing? See, this message is called flash message. Let me show you exactly what are flash messages, and each one of you in whatever playlist, whatever article, there is going to be a video talking about flash messages. تمام? If you are doing a web application or a mobile application, this is a terminology, a technical terminology in app development in general. Let me show you what are flash messages in Moodle. What does it look like? احنا بنطلع ازاي? Let's just log out. Okay, so listen. Exactly. Let me just write any gibberish, and obviously it's not going to log me in. And this red highlighted box, this is a flash message. As you can tell, flash messages should be as close as possible to what? To what layer? To the user interface, to the front end.
front end should have flash message. Right? Front end should have flash messages.
The problem with my implementation is that I included the flash message or the print statement inside register, which
Is a part of the back end. Inside the code. Because I've seen most of the projects the PDC. So you will see that you are going to call flash messages inside the same function that does the logic. Actually, it doesn't do this. Slash messages needs to be separated from the main logic. Right? So
in order to facilitate this, what is the solution here? Take a look at this one. Yes, this is the point. So flash messages are just close to the front end layers, to the user interface layer, for example, right? And this should be display an error message or a success message. يعني ممكن يبقى a highlighted red box or a green box saying that you have posted something successfully and so on, right? And you should keep the logic, whatever is doing the logic for you. You should minimize it to return true on success if the registration is done, or true or false يعني flag if the registration is not done. تمام? So this is how a refactored version should look like. In the back end, in logic.py, I minimize the responsibility for register to only validate and append. And if the validation is not done correctly, this guy exists in the database, I'm just going to return a false. And if he was validated, this user was not inside the database, I'm just going to create it in the database and return a true. تمام? And then in the user interface, this is where you should implement the flash messages, right? I said that if this register returned true, this means that we have created the account, then this is my returned flash message, right? If not, then this is my returned error flash message. This is the success and this is the error one. Right? ماشي؟ طيب, there's something called monkey batching or matching the return patterns. I'm not going to talk about this. You can يعني obviously tell whenever you look at the code. Take a look at this. If you didn't understand it, يعني come back to me. تمام؟ Yes. Not necessarily. ليه؟ لأن registration parts of the registration
can't do anything about it.
So whenever you say registration, you validate, and then if it's valid, then you register. فاهم الفكرة؟
This is possible too. Think about it.
There's something called include or included use case. This use case diagram, whenever you say that register, obviously you're going to say something like include validate inputs. So this use case is not going to be finished unless this included use case is implemented. So they all tie together. تمام? Right. Essentially, we have finished our naive implementation. Now I'm going to discuss the refactoring into object-oriented. And this is where the fun part should start, يعني, inshallah. تمام? So the fun, yes. This is the main point of this use case. Something better that we can do. So I'm going to create a data access class, and this the final version. عشان برضه انت هتشتغل معايا, you're going to work with me. The final version of the procedural code is called procedural version 3, and this can be found in week 4. Okay, I'm going to start off with data access. I'm going to refactor the layer at the end here, only this one, and you are going to refactor this one and facilitate the connection between two. Okay, so let me open a new window. Okay, this is the folder on Moodle. It's called Procedural Version 3. I'm going to select the folder. Okay, so this is essentially my procedural final version. If I'm going to refactor this into object-oriented, and please ركز بقى معايا, because this is the most important part. I don't want you to keep creating classes without a value, without knowing why do we create a class. Why do we create an object? Because the tutorial said that, because the video that I'm following said that. لازم تبقى فاهم انت بتعمل ايه. مش عايز اخضك بطريقه انا اقول لك ان انا هسالك انت ليه عامل كلاس, مش عايز اقول كده, يعني ما تخليش ان ده الموتيف, بس انت لازم تبقى فاهم why do we use a class, why do we use an object. It solves something. So the problem, as we've seen, globals in the procedural code and the high coupling in every function. حلو. let's take a look at object-oriented. Let's take a look at a different school of thought. Okay, so I'm just going to create a file. Just going to. Yes, this is the one. البروسيجر ده المفروض يعني you have finished these in lab 3 and lab 2. But anyways, this is the final version of the procedural code. I'm going to create a file and I'm going to call it data access, right? .py. And this is going to contain a class within the same name. So I'm just going to keep this here. So you should see the differences. So this is a class called data access, right? Right? Now let's take a look here. Transform this procedural code So let's say that we have a constructor. This constructor in Python is just named as init. And let me just refresh some stuff with you. Why do we need a constructor? What is the main point of constructor? Thank you. So it initializes things for me. That's it. Your constructor, shabab, your constructor needs to be as thin as possible. Do the initializing and that's it. It should not contain certain logic. Type. Let's say that I have this constructor. I don't know what is going to be included next, but I know that we should have the same set of functions, right, as methods in my class, right? So let me rewrite these as methods, right? So I'm just going to say, can actually say كنا بنعملها ازاي. So let's take these and place them here. Pass is just a placeholder. Pass means that I don't have an idea what is the implementation is going to look like for the time being. Pass. Until I figure out the implementation, I'm going to change to remove this pass. تمام? So these are the functions, these are the methods now. Now we know that these methods should be accessed from an object created out of this class. تاني. These methods should be accessible from any object created out of this class. What does this mean? This means that if I created an object out of this list, let's say that this is a quick driver code. I'm just going to comment this and remove it later on. So this is the class here, right? So I created an object and I'm going to call it DA or data access. So from any object of data access, I should be able to call find by, I should be able to call prepare connection and read and write. تمام؟ هو ده سؤالك يا عمر على فكرة إنه لما أدوس دوت إيه اللي المفروض يظهر لي؟ This is the kind of abstraction, right? Whenever you click on dot, what should the editor tell you, right? So if you are facilitating abstraction and information hiding correctly, I should only see these four. Whenever I go to a logic object, if you say logic dot, you should only see a register, login, that's it. تمام؟ إيه؟ This is the clean architecture بالظبط. Thank you. قول يا عمر. For the time being لا احنا بنتكلم هنا على data access layer. So if I click on dot, I should see in SD all of these. تمام? So for the time being, if I want to make sure that this is actually a thing, right? I need to make sure that all of these functions are accessible from any object, and you can easily do this by just placing self. I know that self is not there in C++. تمام؟ بس this يعني it just means that these functions are accessible from any object that you create out of this class. بس كده. تمام؟ طيب. So we have created the functions. Let me just take the definition of the function actually. Right? And let's remove pass. Let's take the first one. Right? So we need this guy actually can be here. It's not gonna harm. I'm just going to place this in front of the class. Right? So now you should see that there are commonalities. What are the common things? Or shared between methods? Take a look at the signature يا جماعة. What is the thing that is shared between every method here? Or most methods. إن كلهم فيهم حاجة اسمها file name and كلهم فيهم حاجة اسمها list, right? So we can start off like this. We can say ايه لا self is this is something for the class for the object itself. دي لازم تبقى موجودة. يعني the first keyword in any method in a class in Python requires you to include self. بس سيبك من self. I'm looking at the okay. Take a look for the procedural code. What is this thing that is shared between all of the function signature? Here file name, right? And here the list like that. Okay, so let's take the definitions as they are. I'm just going to start with the first two. ولا اقول لكم على حاجه let's just take them as they are كده كلهم هنحطهم مره واحده. Okay, and I'm going to place self in everyone. Okay, طيب. So let's remove the global. The first option here, the first thing that we should do is removing globals. How can we do that? شباب شايفين الجلوبال this global that is used inside read? This one. Obviously this is a sharing thing, right? So there's sharing هنا. This is the common thing, which is essentially the prepare connection or the file path, right? So we can do the following. Let's say that every method, right, can access the pool of variables, right? The pool of variables within the same object. So if I know this information and all of these methods can share the variables defined within the constructor, I can easily, instead of using globals, I can just say this guy that you want to have, I can place it here. So this is my variable, right? And obviously this variable, this connection, takes its value from which class? From which method, معلش? The prepare connection, right? So prepare connection is the one responsible for giving this connection a value, right? So I can actually comment this file or this line, and I can take this function and place it here, like this. But it's going to tell you there's a problem. Me, as an object of data access, I cannot find this prepare connection. The reason here is that if this is a method within the class, you need to tell the constructor that you can find it in yourself. So in yourself means that you should just place self before it. تمام? Right? And finally, you need the file name, and the file name can actually be, you can send it as an argument immediately. So you can say that we want user the JSON, like this. Okay. To make this slightly generic, we can leave file name as it is, and let's say that this file name is going to be passed as an argument to the constructor. تمام؟ فاهمين اللي حصل ولا لا؟ مش فاهمين. And this and globals are essentially a pattern. Global. All these functions are methods. They are in the same class. Then any method Right? So with this final edit here, it's not the final edit, but it's just the one before the final touch. We can say that this is essentially how my read function looks like. تمام? And notice something. We don't even need the file. شباب, do you see this one? Do you see the file name inside read? File name is highlighted as a grayed argument, meaning that it is not used in the function. Right? You did not use this argument that you are passing. This is how Visual Studio Code is telling you that you're just passing an injected dependency that you're not using. Right? So we can actually omit this. ممكن نشيل الفايل name. ليه? Why is it possible for us to remove it? Because it's already passed to the constructor. تمام؟ يعني دلوقتي if I remove the file name from read, it is totally fine because the one who needs the file name mean the prepare connection, and we did the prepare connection in the initializer. So if you want to see how this is going to look like, file name is going to be passed to the constructor when you construct an object. So I'm trying now to construct this object. I'm going to pass the file name, the actual file name, which is in this case a user to JSON. تمام? And that's it. Read now doesn't really need any argument anymore. نفس الفكرة بالنسبة للwrite. Okay? One last thing, I think we can stick with the current implementation. تمام? So this is how data access should look like. تمام? This is the refactored version. Okay? So this is the refactored version. Okay? Actually, ممكن اجيبها من السلايد. Can grab it from the slide. So this is the refactored version diagram. Okay? Stored file path, prepare connection, read, write, and find by. Now your responsibility now is to refactor the logic.py, which is a procedural module, into an object-oriented one, into a class. تمام? And you should link it to data access. تمام? If you want to take a look at how this is implemented procedurally, take a look at the first at the version 3 on your in week 3, or sorry, in week 4, right? And you're going to see that currently this is the procedural version. Logic only accesses what? Data access. Essentially, it's going to be slightly the same thing, yeah. تمام? So I want you to refactor these functions from a procedural file into a class. تمام? And you should name this class as logic class. تمام? I wanted to see what are the relationships that you can use in order to facilitate this. تمام؟ فكل واحد يفتح لي البي سي. Everyone open the PC in front of you or the laptop that you have, whatever. تمام؟ And download the file here in week 4. تمام؟ Download this file. It's called codes procedural version 3. Extract it and start working immediately on logic.py. And I'm going to include the code that we have just refactored for the data access on the side. Open the codes, download the codes from the procedural version, try to refactor the logic file into a logic
create a virtual and download the file, open it in and start refactoring the file. You can work in groups if you want. Yes, the refactored data access. This is what the refactored data access file looks on the right hand side as a class. Yes, refactored the logic is essentially just a social function sorted by doing a class expression and put all the C functions inside the class as method and see what value each function. And remember, after you refactor a logic class, remember after you do this refactoring, think about the relationship. How can you connect these two? Logic class? No, no, logic only. Logic define only. Refactor can be logic class. We have multiple associations here. We have association, composition, and this time relationships is going to be created. Like in the previous semester, in the first unit, composition of extract. This time we are going to create from the associations. And this is just a friendly question between you and me. Do you want the lab to be like a lecture style? And should I just go into the lab and tell you that this stuff that we're going to do it alone? You want this to happen? Don't you want to try anything? I don't have the vibe from the entire group yet. I don't feel the vibe from you that you want to try something. Tell me what you want. ممكن الموضوع بالنسبه لي مريح يعني انا ادخل واعمل انا كل الكلام extract, open it for business records. And there is the file to see that one function does is looking for. And it's just exactly a file part of this method as we get to
الاتندنس بتاعه عادي عادي، بس في حد انا اخش اتندنس بتاعه.
لو مش عارف تعمل انترنت ديبلوي جهز داتا اكسس كلاسترز فجهز كل داتا اكسس هو كده كده بسيط these functions اصلا هي نفسها اللي موجوده في الاكسس كل الحكايه ان انت هتكونفيرت الاثنين So all the creation once you create the function project, immediately you will see that since user is created, I will initialize with table view. Now, in order to, because we cannot be working some of the codes classes and some of the procedural, so instead of having this, we need to create the same file of this game. Yes. The same class, the same file. Going to make these two files, put self here and self here, and the same function.
عبد الرحمن دلوقتي let's say ان this is the first object تمام and this is the third object تمام any object that I'm going to create out of data access تمام لو الاوبجكت ده انا معرف الحاجات فيه سيلف معناها انه within any object هلاقي حاجه اسمها stored file لان قبله سيلف هلاقي حاجه اسمها prepare connection لان فيها سيلف هلاقي ميثود اسمها read لان فيها سيلف معناها بس ان الاوبجكت هيبقى فيه الكلام ده بس بالظبط ثانك يو يعني انت حتى قلتها بطريقه احسن مني ان الاوبجكت اللي انا هكريته بره ده في الكلاينت في الدرايفر هيبقى ليه اكسس لكل الميثودز اللي واخده سيلف لكل الفاريبلز اللي واخده سيلف دوت بالظبط كده صح عشان تشيره within the object itself within the methods جوه الاوبجكت and so on تمام
شباب اي حد مش فاهم سيلف يعني معلش ركز معايا بس. طيب ده how this code او step of code بس احنا مش عايزين نرجع هنا الفايل ده فيه definition يعني مين اللي هيكاري التوبيك دي؟ ده قبلها اللير اللي قبلها على طول اللي هي اللوجيك. So here we should be able to go to this is the client صح؟ بس هو كل البوينت اللي بيبقى عندي كلاس اصلا احنا مش هنغير اي حاجه define it initialize it somewhere there we share it anywhere صح؟ But if I want to share this every method صح؟ ودي هتبقى طبعا سيمبل دي نفس الفكره خلاص انا ما عرفتش واحد يقول لي طب دلوقتي انت لما تعمل سيرف هي خلاص يبقى هتعمل سيرف كده مالتي دوكس سيرف دي بتخش تشيل ده مش اوبس ده معناه ان انا جوه الكلاس نفسها اكشلي البدايه بتاعت التشيننج عندي اوكي وفي كومنتس يعني الكومنتس في الكود بيبين ان this is مش خبر this is مثلا avoiding the dry يعني avoiding within the object itself.
طيب في حد مش فاهم اللي احنا عملناه؟
تاخد الفاريبل كبريفكس اول ارجمنت بس
اوكي شباب
this is the solution. For just 1 second.
bit of the code. Right? So this is the solution for the logic class, right? If you reach this solution, then you are on good steps. تمام? We said that we need the read function, but we know that we have a class that has all of the CRUDs. So I've created an object out of this class, and I called it the data access object, and I used the read here. تمام? All of this was initialized in the constructor, and then later on we said that we need to access the write. Right? So the write can be accessed from this object, which is shared with every other method. Okay? Now, my question is the following. We have created We have created this logic class. Now, how can we link it? Where is the link? Shabab, the association type will have a grade. Whenever we create classes, the association type between two classes will have a certain grade. Okay? So what is the association type between the طبعا انا كاتب لك انها composition يعني بس we have an association type between logic class and the data access class, and it is written here to be composition. So this is essentially how the class diagram should look like, right? So we have a composition between logic class and data access. And notice that how the logic class is framed. How many variables do we have in the logic class? We have the data access object, right, which is a type of data access class, right? And we have the timber users. Okay? Why is this considered to be composition? Where is the composition here? Obviously, it is this line. But what does this mean? What does it mean whenever we say that we have composition? Mahmoud wa Abdullah. What does it mean whenever we say that we have composition? This line is the reason. This line is the link. First of all, this is the link between you and the data access. Okay? But this link is considered to be what? Composition. This association type is composition. Right? If you do not see this, I can just take this here. Okay? So this is composition. Composition, if we want to recap on the previous association types, this was essentially composition. Let me just show you this really quickly. Okay? So composition was essentially something like this. Creating an object. See, this is class A. Okay? And this is class B. So creating an object. Aisha and Muhammad. So class A and class B. If I created an object from a different class, they refer to as the child in a child and parent in composition. Okay? So if I created an object out of B inside A, inside the constructor of A, this is considered to be composition. Right? As long as there is self. Tamam? If I am storing the created object inside A, meaning that I'm saying this variable is going to be stored inside every object, so I have self. So there's a constant creation for this object. It always lives there. This is composition. Tamam? If I remove the self from here, if I remove the self from here, this is not composition anymore. Tamam? This is called dependency. And I'm going to talk about dependency in the next lab. Tamam? But for the time being, if we save the object that we have created, this is composition. Composition is the reason for what we call high coupling. There's a different version for high coupling, and it can be facilitated via composition. Tamam? I want you to think about, before the next lab, to think about a way to rewrite this. Tamam? How can we rewrite this to be loosely coupled? Right? The answer is using something called, that we have discussed today, is called dependency injection. Right? Or in another word, just using association. Right? If we use just association, just dependency injection, right, we will never have composition. Composition is bad for me in testing. It is the same concept. Shabab, procedurally, it's the same concept. Okay, خلاص we're done.